As soon as you see the button there.
The one that says live.
Yeah, I can't see it because I'm setting it up. Is it live? So that
It
means
says live.
then we're live.
And we're live. We have James Pepper, Bryn here, Peggy Delaney, and Senator Pearson listening in. I don't know if he's real. I keep seeing the smiling face of Senator Pearson,
I know.
even when he shouldn't be smiling.
Oh, there he is.
Here's
Oh,
my
there he
actual
is.
face. Good morning.
Good
The
morning.
same smiling face.
So we're awaiting Marshall Paul, but H-254 is a bill that's on the floor relating to adequate shelter for livestock. And just a little bit of history here. Back in the day, we did a bill on the adequate shelter for pets and other animals. And I think that was probably one of the most hotly disputed bills with the other body that I've ever been involved with. And I was on a conference committee that was one of the most exciting that I've ever been on. They were selling tickets and providing popcorn. And it involves Representative Bartholomew was the chair of the House committee, and I can't remember the other two, but Senator Starr and Senator Ash were the leaders on this bill. And I remember Senator Ash drawing a picture of the way they had insisted that we do the tethering of the animals. And clearly the amount of space given in the tether would have hung any animal that was out on a being chained. And so when we heard that chaining animals was part of this bill, the collective ears of the Senate Judiciary Committee went up and said, wait a minute, will those poor animals, whether they be horses or whatever, who are chained outside, have any chance of not being choked to death by the House not understanding tethering?
And as you remember, Tim drew a little two photographs. One had the house version
Right.
with the little puppy hanging about 4 feet off the ground, and then the Senate version with the little puppy running very happily around his tether.
So we've asked.
What is the number here? Is it on our website?
That's 254.
Oh, it told me it said there's no such thing.
H254.
H254.
Yeah.
And it's on
I
the
know.
website.
It says, we're having trouble finding that site.
Oh, geez.
Well, at any rate, Pepper,
is
have you
everybody-
looked at the bill?
I have looked at the bill, yes.
Do you have any concerns about the bill as it's currently in front of the Senate? Since you'd have to prosecute these cases.
Yeah. For the record, James Pepper, Department of State's Attorneys and Sheriffs.
Let me get it.
So we had a prosecutor testify on this bill in the House. Her name's Sally Adams. She's our representative on the Animal Cruelty Investigations Advisory Board. And overall, this bill adds some more clarity to the definitions in the animal cruelty statutes. Those are helpful additions. However, the proposed language still leaves a degree of ambiguity and subjectivity that would allow, or that would make these crimes, again, difficult to enforce. And I can point to specifics if you'd like. I'm on the unofficial as passed by the House version. There's something about adequate constructed shelter requiring that the inadequate shelter is that all animals can be housed comfortably. Well, trying to write a jury instruction around what comfortably would be would be difficult, I think. There's a section about adequate ventilation that is sufficient to prevent the accumulation of toxic gases. The question that came to our prosecutor's mind, who's prosecuted many of these cases, is how much accumulation is permissible. OSHA has standards for humans, so it's 35 parts per million for 15 minutes. However, the Association of Shelter Veterinarians has a very different standard for dogs. And, I know a lot of these definitions are backed up by Agency of Agriculture regulations and rules. So it's not like these things couldn't be worked out. There's another section about adequate exercise, and I know that there's some additional language about maybe what adequate exercise could look like, or based on muscle tone and things like that. But and again, adequate food. I think it's okay that these statutes have some ambiguity, particularly when you look at what the purpose of the statutes are. And there's a purpose section it's under 13 VSA 351A, which says that, these are really meant to be educational. The enforcement of this is really supposed to be through voluntary resolution with the animal owner. And so really, like, talking about criminal penalties for these, and the criminal penalties are all for the non-egregious cases, 1 year misdemeanors that are presumptively eligible for diversion, and you can actually issue a civil violation in lieu of a criminal prosecution for kind of the first offense or for the minor offenses. So, in some ways, it's okay that there are these ambiguities that exist in the statute. However, the animal task force that I mentioned earlier had a very important amendment to this that looks like it was taken out and put into a separate bill. And that bill hasn't advanced. It's on the House floor, which would really limit the types of people that can enforce these statutes, which, if you look at the definition of a humane officer that's eligible to enforce these statutes, it includes all the traditional players, the sheriffs, deputy sheriffs, constables, state's attorneys, state police, game wardens, but then it includes motor vehicle inspectors, liquor investigators, and then even more kind of attenuated are the Humane Society officers or employees or agents, or essentially anyone that's appointed by a local board, and that starts to get, for instance, our prosecutor mentioned that there was a woman up in the Northeast Kingdom who started a nonprofit, and then all of a sudden was going around trying to enforce these statutes. And then when people started complaining about this and wanting to sue the state for this, and are we liable for her actions when the statute permits her to enforce these things? So they actually proposed an amendment, this animal cruelty task force, that would essentially limit the amount of people that can enforce the statutes, require certification for these kind of humane society officers that could be overseen by this task force, and then or the Secretary of State, and then just kind of create minimum standards for anyone who's seeking to enforce these. So that provision was taken out and it's put into a different bill. It's H940. So, I think the two bills together make a lot of sense. But ultimately, we're supportive of this language if it's, if the committee wants to proceed with it. But I think that, it offers a little bit of ambiguity in there. And then when you combine that with the kind of odd kind of enforcement rules, it creates a situation that, is somewhat untenable, or could be untenable.
Right. I'm concerned about the term comfortable that you raised in your opening remarks.
Right.
Do you have a suggestion for a different language?
I could come up with one. I could propose one to the committee if you'd like. I mean, I think that
We prefer it be to the Agriculture Committee.
Okay.
Since the bill is not here, but it would seem that anything that would inhibit a prosecutor from prosecuting egregious cases would be problematic. And I don't know what the Agriculture Committee wants to do about the other bill, whether they looked at that. The House policy appears to be that they're not passing any bill that didn't pass through before crossover out of the House, but they will take up Senate bills. So if the Senate were to add that amendment, they would take that up.
Are you speaking about adding the amendment from 940 that limits the number of people? That
Well,
sounds-
yeah, I think that was, I don't know if, it's really up to the Agriculture Committee, and we have the vice chair here,
I'd like to-
Senator Pearson, but they
Yeah.
should talk that over. But if there was an amendment to the word comfortable, I mean, I can see where that would be a matter of, was the horse comfortable? You can't ask
And-
the horse unless it's Mr. Ed, so.
And when you're talking about criminal prosecution, I mean, the
Right.
jurors have to be unanimous on what they deem comfortable. How are they going to define comfortable? And so,
Right.
you know, if you have a subjective term like that in there, then, you know, you could run the risk of, you know, 6 jurors thinking comfortable is one thing and 6 another. And then the prosecution just, I mean, we would try and lay it out in a jury instruction, but it seems like it would be just a
Yeah.
kind of
There have been a
negotiation.
number of cases in nearby New York State in the Saratoga region of, you know, cruelty to thoroughbred animals who end up either in a trainer's responsibility or others. And, you know, those cases, I don't know what New York uses, but they're usually pretty horrific when they come to the attention. And I know that there have been a couple of cases. I remember former Public Safety Commissioner Flynn had a couple of cases he tried to deal with on horses. He ended up adopting the horses, but
You know, I am concerned about without some of, you know, people who are in the business are quite militant about protecting animals, and that's fine. But I think to have, you know, a farmer charged when, you know, it's a questionable case, before it even got to the jury, I mean, the farmer, if it's a farmer, has had to spend, obviously will get an attorney, has had to spend money there. And is it not better to, we've had this before, and it seemed like sometimes there was a matter of some of the people who are filing the complaints or going out there, if they had worked with the person, some things could have been worked out. And some of those groups do that. There's that horse shelter in North Clarendon that works with a lot of people. And even though they take in horses that have been confiscated as well, but it seems like it's a better route than really just somebody charging somebody. And then, you know, it's a weak case. And it could cost people a lot of money and consternation and reputation in the community. So if it's a bad case, I think you'll get the person, but not, anyway.
That's absolutely right. And I think that a case when these work out well, it's when a prosecutor is notified and then they reach out to the state veterinarian, Dr. Haas. And then Dr. Haas goes and looks at the situation and then creates kind of a list of improvements that need to be made or remediation efforts. And then usually that is totally fine. That's usually the way things work. I mean, prosecution is often a last resort for these. And so the prosecution really happens on those egregious cases. That's why some of these ambiguities give me a little bit of pause. And then also just the opening up of who the humane officer can be, who might not follow that traditional route. You know, those are the only 2 areas that give me pause on this bill.
Senator Sears, you're muted.
I appreciate that. Senator Pearson,
Yes.
you've heard the comments from Mr. Pepper,
Yeah.
and hopefully you can take them back to the committee and the committee can decide. But I do think at the very least, you should look at an alternative word for the comfortable, which, and hopefully, Pepper, you can work with the Agriculture Committee and Senator Pearson on an alternative word for comfortable.
Sure. I mean, I think
I mean, it's up to you all.
we also have sort of normal muscle tone, and there are a lot of judgment calls, and I would guess our statutes are riddled with those kinds of things. And if you were in front of a jury, you would bring in experts and they would have to opine here. Mr. Pepper's correct that the charges are well down the road, and that when a complaint comes in, if the complaint has any validity, then the agency and Dr. Haas and others go to work with the livestock owner to address the problem. This is a situation where a statute that's been in place has been tricky and subjective in some cases, and we're trying to move it forward to be less subjective. I don't think we've gone all the way there. I don't think anyone's claiming to. We're just trying to make it more clear, but not claiming 100% clarity. So we're happy to look at language. Basically, we heard from the Livestock Council that they were supportive. This was a move in the right direction. Dr. Haas is supportive. So if it's the first time hearing from people that have been engaged in it that were detractors. So if Mr. Pepper wants to testify to Senate Ag or have his people do that, obviously they should let us know. But I do think that, to the point, Mr. Chair, of comfortable and adequate muscle tone, I mean, there are standards all over our statutes that require experts to then interpret them. And I don't see this as being terribly different there.
All right. Well, I can't ask for anything more than that.
I had understood that you took this in because of.
We didn't actually take it in. I just asked to hold it off
Okay.
a vote until we understood some of the things and could hear from Marshall Paul is not here right now, so we're not going to hear from the defense side, but to hear from the state's attorneys and the defender general on the prosecutorial end of this, since it does create a crime. So we didn't take the bill in. It's not here. It's still, I believe, scheduled to be taken up today or tomorrow. I can't remember which. So it's certainly up to the Agriculture Committee. I think I would just point out, or Senator Nitka may point out, what the testimony was here and the concerns, and leave it at that. And it's up to the Agriculture Committee.
And I hope
maybe it would be better if you were to express those concerns, Senator Nitka, since you have excellent notes.
Well, like embarrassingly, I've just been looking for my notes, which since it's not like I'm at the State House and organized. It's like I'm rummaging through things.
You're in your car, Alice.
Anyway,
and I just want to say Senator Hardy is at her kid's 8th grade
I
graduation.
know.
Otherwise she would be with you. But maybe a question for Brent. We're not creating a crime here. We're just amending current crimes, if you like. I believe I have that right, correct?
Yes.
so the question then the other day, recalling that, was, does it put more people in those crimes that are already there?
Does it put more people?
Yes, in those crimes that already exist. In other words, is it broadening the scope of who would go in there? Who
Would be charged, you mean?
could be charged?
If that's a question for me, I'm glad to answer it. And for the record, Brent Hare from Legislative Council. I would say no, I don't think it does. It provides some additional parameters around what is considered adequate shelter, what's considered adequate ventilation. It is mostly a bill that clarifies existing provisions. And one additional thing I thought I would share with you, Senator, and with respect to your concern, is that both agriculture committees heard testimony that it's a very small percentage of complaints that go to a litigation phase. The vast majority of them are either sort of considered baseless, or they are worked out without having to go to litigation. And that's actually a part of our statute, 35 or 13 VSA 351A. The purpose of the cruelty to animals statute actually sets out that the goal should be to seek voluntary resolution of violations. So I believe that that is not only happening in practice, but it's also in statute.
Good,
If that's helpful.
thank you.
Also, the bill is scheduled for third reading today.
Yeah.
Senator Sears, can I just respond to Senator Pearson quickly?
Absolutely. Yep.
Senator Pearson, I agree that, or our state's attorneys agree that this is an improvement. It adds a lot more clarity. I was merely just going through the spots, the points where I thought maybe some additional clarity might be helpful, but I absolutely agree that this is an improvement to what we currently have. And, as we've been all saying, that if the purpose of this is to offer remediation to people that might be running afoul of these recommendations or these statutes, then the ambiguity is not detrimental to a certain extent. I mean, when we come to the prosecution phase, there might be some questions, but if we're trying to just correct behavior in a non-criminal context, then having some ambiguity in there is totally is fine.
Well, I'll be glad to take the feedback back to the committee, and we'll see if what they do with it. You're muted, Senator Sears.
Got to remember to unmute. I love this Zoom life. And I will see you at noontime, Senator Pearson.
Yes, look forward to it.
Look forward to it as well. Senator Nick, have you found your notes so that you could speak for the committee?
No, I have not.
All right, I'll do my best. It's an improvement. There could be a few more improvements, but we thank.
But they'll keep working on it.
The Agriculture Committee should continue to work on it, and there is another bill in the House that would be a companion bill that should be addressed too. I think that's the summary.
Why are they going, why is ag going to work on it? It's third reading on the floor today.
No. In future years, I would think that they keep working on it. That's the
Right.
way I interpreted that, is that.
Yeah.
you take
Senator
small
White,
steps.
would you like to report this?
No. But thank you so much for the opportunity.
And the companion bill is scheduled for the floor in the House on June 12th. So
Oh, okay.
it may be coming yet.
Yeah, I don't know. Hopefully tomorrow they'll tell us when we're adjourning in June, because I've gotten emails from people saying, before you adjourn on June 15th, please do this, this, and this. I had no idea it was June 15th, but.
I could handle that, although we do have a lot of work to do.
Well,
What's June
yeah.
15th?
No, nothing.
Nothing, but I got
Oh.
email from somebody suggesting that we do something before we adjourn on June 15th. So I didn't
Oh,
know
that one. Yeah.
if
yeah.
somebody has sent out a message that we're adjourning on the 15th, which is fine with me. I go swimming. I don't care.
Will that be
Play a
all?
lot of golf. That's all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator
You too.
Pearson.
Thank you, Senator Pearson.
So if we could shift gears, we're scheduled for a break at 10:30. So if we can wait until 10:30, we hopefully, the gear I'm shifting to is trying to go from animal cruelty to justice reinvestment 2. And I really, it's one of these cases where I'm trying to keep track of the real issues, Bryn, that we have, so that I don't have to, you did a great job of the side by side, but it seems to me they remove probation, they remove compassionate parole, they changed the parole sections from the Senate version. They created some issues with the furlough revocation appeal that the Corrections Department is upset about. They delayed good time to January 1st. And they reinstated the Justice Reinvestment 2 working group. So are those the major changes, or have I missed something?
Yes, that is, those are the changes that I would characterize as being the most significant changes made by the House.
Okay. Can you, I know that Mary Jane Ainsworth is here from the parole board, and it's my understanding that the changes made the parole sections had to do with recommendations of the parole board. Maybe we can start there and work our way down to these issues. If there's other issues that other committee members have, please add to this list. But
Yes, just to be clear,
well, I should say, I'm trying to get to a point where we concur with further proposal of amendments. And what should those amendments be, rather than asking for a committee conference?
so I think it was section 6, parole interviews and reviews, that you wanted Mary Jane Ainsworth to testify about.
Yes. And now I got to go to my 60-page.
Yeah, if you could tell us what page to go to, so I don't have to scroll through 65.
You have the page number, Bryn? Bryn, we lost Bryn. The page number
Are you, is the committee
on the
looking?
side by side.
Okay, I'll get that. It's page 27 on the side by side,
Great, thank you.
the House
Thank you.
version, section 6.
Mary Jane, if you could go ahead, please.
Okay, good morning, committee. This is Mary Jane Ainsworth, Executive Director of the Parole Board. This was a suggestion that Dean George, our chairman, had made regarding, I'm sorry, I just clicked the wrong page. Regarding changing the way we do our record reviews. Currently, our record reviews are done based on the length of their maximum sentence. Sometimes if they have a maximum sentence under 15 years, they have record reviews done every year, which is basically a paper review of their file. If their sentence is over 15 years, their maximum sentence is over 15 years, it's done every 2 years, and an inmate can request to see the board every 2 years. For consistency purposes and also to ensure that all offenders' files are being reviewed, we asked for the change to be made to make it across the board 1 year review for all offenders. This will allow each offender to have their files reviewed. DOC sends in an update of where the case is at over the last year. The parole board has been requesting many more record reviews to be seen for interviews because there has been insufficient evidence in the reports to justify why they are not being brought forward for parole. So thus why we requested this change.
Okay. What will, yeah, Senator White, please.
I just want to make it clear that, so what this is saying is that everybody's record gets reviewed every year instead of just those who are serving less than 15 years.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
And Ellen Wheeler-Wurst is here from the Justice Center. Do you have any comments on this section, Ellen? Hi, Ellen. Welcome back.
Hello. Thanks for having me. I'm catching up. So no comments from me. I'm just going to be listening to make sure that I'm following along with everybody.
Okay. Matt Valerio. Good morning.
Morning. I just popped in because I was giving my quote unquote legislative update to the public defenders for the last hour. But you didn't do anything, so.
We didn't do anything.
Nothing got passed so far.
Nothing got passed. We're just starting. So
I ended up spending an hour talking about money.
well,
Great fun.
yeah. Are there any objections from the Defender General regarding the parole changes?
I'm sorry that I have to know where you are in the bill right now.
We're on section 6.
Okay.
Changes on page 27 of the side-by-side that Bryn prepared. And it's the new provisions requiring that all offenders not on parole at the completion of their minimum sentence have their cases reviewed annually by the parole board. The parole board must conduct a review annually and conduct an interview annually if requested by the offender or the department, regardless of the offender's maximum sentence.
Yeah, I don't think we had any objection to that.
Okay. Pepper, is that true for you as well? Or did the state's attorneys object to this section?
No, and the state's attorneys are really going to limit their comments to sections that directly impact the kind of pre-sentence, the kind of the state's attorney's jurisdiction. So no, there's no objection to this.
Okay. Anybody with any objection? Committee, do you want any further clarification on this, or would we accept this provision?
I think it's fine.
Okay.
I think it's fine.
Well, that was easy. So, Bryn, if you want to, maybe we could, since, what did I just do? How did I get into the chat again? Every time I try to go to a different screen, maybe we could, since another addition, if you could tell us where the the issue of the Justice Reinvestment 2 working group. Could you take us there? So
Sure.
I'm trying to go through the issues by issue. And I know I've jumped ahead of some of the agenda, but which I now lost the agenda. Oh, there it is. God, it should be so easy. Do you want to go to the reinstatement, what section that might be?
That's section 21
Yep.
of the House version of the bill, which is on page 71 of the side-by-side.
Good. We're going right to the end then.
You hear me now, Dave? I can hear
Yep.
you again.
Who are you?
If it doesn't work, I apologize.
Okay.
Who is it?
Who is it? All right. The House, we had a working group in section 20.
That's right. You had a working group in section 20 that was tasked with looking at programming, department programming, and how that programming impacted sentence lengths and other things. And that work was reassigned to this Justice Reinvestment 2 working group. So you'll see it's a part of the working group's tasks now. So again, this idea to reinstate the working group, I think you heard some testimony about this several weeks ago from the Justice Center. This was a recommendation of the Justice Center to have a group that was sort of overseeing the implementation of policies in 338, and also being tasked with looking at various specific issues and reporting back to the legislature on any changes that might need to be made as justice reinvestment sort of rolls out. So all of this language starting on page 71 is highlighted that's new, setting up reinstating the working group, adding the parole board to the working group, providing oversight of the rollout. And then if you go to the next page, you'll see their duties. And then there are 9 specific tasks under that subsection for duties. So that's where I am now, starting on section 1. They're required to identify any gaps in screening and assessment and case planning for people who are incarcerated. And that's based on information that's gathered and provided to the working group from the Agency of Human Services. And you'll see that is the following section, is the section directing the Agency of Human Services to gather that data. And And then subsection 2 there on the same page, identifying tools to assist in identifying risk factors that can be targeted with services and treatment programs. That was a part of the what was in your section 20. So that's moved here, and determining how to share information about risk assessments and available department and community-based programming. That was a part of your section 20. That was the report on it. Just reassigned now to this Justice Reinvestment 2 working group, which has the same stakeholders as your working group, except for the addition, the expanded version. And then 4 and 5, these were added sort of to replace the first 3 sections of the bill that were on probation that the House removed. So they removed those sections that provided that day-for-day credit towards an underlying sentence for a probationer who's serving their probation without a violation. All those sections were removed by the House, and instead the House directed this working group to study the issue. So specifically study the efficacy of that policy using probation. Oh, I'm sorry. Section 4 is something separate. It's this was, I believe, a request of the Department of Corrections to study the efficacy of using probation as a presumptive sentencing structure for certain types of offenses, for which connections to community-based programming leads to better outcomes. And then it's number 5 that the House recommended replace the sections 2 through 4, I believe, on probation, to evaluate that policy of probationers earning credit towards their suspended sentence, and then some specifics about how they should look at that issue, how to implement that policy without impacting the length of probation terms or suspended sentences. Again, that was the concern that was raised by the state's attorneys for those sections of the bill. Whether that credit should be applied to both the minimum and the maximum suspended sentence. Whether accrual of that credit should equal the imposed maximum term of imprisonment or the statutory maximum term of imprisonment. Whether the terms for misdemeanors should be for a specific duration, not to exceed 2 years, or if the court should have discretion to impose a longer term in the interest of justice. And then subdivision 6 there is also about probation. And it tasks the working group with exploring additional options regarding probation, including a policy that would be modeled after probation midpoint reviews that are currently provided for in statute, or allowing release from probation prior to the end of the imposed probation term, either in addition to or instead of policy for providing 1 day of credit towards the suspended sentence for every day that a person serves their probation term without a violation.
Okay.
Those are just the probation ones, and then there's.
Why don't we stop there and
Okay.
Committee? This seems to be one of the big issues that I'm troubled by in the House version, that they were removing what I thought was an attempt to make probation more meaningful, and also to recognize that people who mess up usually do so in the first 7 to 12 months, first 3 to 12 months of their probation term, and after that, pretty much ready to leave. And I thought at least they would look at some form of review of probation, similar to what we do with review of parole. But obviously, they decided to take it all out. Senator White.
Well, I have some real problems with this, because I think that there does need to be a review of probation and parole. And I believe, and I would be very interested to hear, because I think what we heard was on the I'm not sure I'm getting the words right, the day for day on parole, is that we heard from the state's attorneys that wouldn't work, because then they would just impose higher sentences to begin with. But that's a decision that the state's attorneys make. So I would just like to hear, I guess, from the state's attorneys, if I heard that or remember it right.
Okay. Pepper, did you want to respond to that question?
Yes, James Pepper, Department of State Attorneys and Sheriffs. Some of I think universally the state's attorneys support justice reinvestment. They certainly supported earned good time and presumptive parole. The probation sections of this that apply a day-for-day credit to the maximum term, and also it was being considered to the minimum term, really struck even our most progressive prosecutors as fundamentally breaking probation. You think about a very typical charge, DUI, kind of a serious high-risk DUI, maybe that involved high levels of alcohol or some sort of collision that didn't result in injury. A very typical sentence is to have a very short minimum, and maybe a typical sentence would be a five to 180 days to serve, all suspended except for a year on probation in order to complete programming. So you think about when you start applying day-for-day credit to that type of sentence, after the first week, there's no longer a minimum term because the person got a day-for-a-day credit towards the minimum. So there's no kind of ability for that kind of enforcement mechanism, that kind of the kind of stick element to completing probation. And then when you think about applying it to the maximum, if you have a year of probation, except, you're getting a day-for-a-day credit for the 180 days, then actually after 180 days, there's no more underlying sentence anymore. So the person actually would benefit from violating their probation term because there's no enforcement mechanism at all anymore. So no matter what, if you apply it to the maximum, your maximum term has to equal your has to be inflated to equal your probationary term. And so that was the concern that was really kind of brought up by even our most progressive state's attorneys, including our Chittenden County state's attorney, that this fundamentally breaks probation, and that the response will have to be just give 2 served sentences, send this over to the Department of Corrections to deal with these individuals. Don't use probation because it's just not going to work anymore. And I totally agree with what Senator Sears said, is that we know from the data and the work that CSG did that after 9 months, 12 months, that most people have either violated their probation or they're no longer at risk of violating their probation. It's that kind of 1-year period that's very risky. And so our counter proposal to this piece was accelerate the midpoint review, which is already the incentive that you're looking for. We already have this midpoint review where DOC will look at you at the 6 months before you reach the midpoint of your sentence. They'll look at, have you completed your programming? And if you have, then they will move the state's attorneys, move to the court to stipulate to modifying probation or eliminating the rest of your probation altogether. And what I said, or what the state's attorneys proposed, is, okay, for some of these longer probationary sentences, why don't you move that midpoint review up to 12 months? After 1 year, don't call it a midpoint review, call it a probation review. And if the person has satisfied the kind of substantive portions of their probation, then you can seek to strike it. And it can go to a court. Even if the state's attorney doesn't stipulate to it, then a court can determine whether or not that probation should be struck. And that was well received by the House, but they weren't sure. I think my interpretation is they weren't sure whether that's better than this day for a day. So they created that study committee, and there is a very specific section in that study committee that says, look at probation review after a fixed period of time that's equal to this kind of high risk period, and see if that's a better path towards reducing probationary sentences than this credit situation.
Okay.
Thanks.
Questions for Pepper? Matt, do you have any comment on this, or Ellen or anyone else?
I had thought that this was one of the key parts of the bill. One of the things that you really don't have is a lot of incentive when you're on probation to try to expedite your release from probation. When we did Justice Reinvestment 1, One of the big things that came out of that working group was having administrative probation be the default, so that people had a guaranteed end time for being effectively watched by the state to make sure that they were doing all right. It seemed to naturally flow given the, given the longer you stay on probation, the more likely it is that you're going to have a technical violation that puts you back in a facility or violates your probation. That we encourage people to get off probation, and it seemed to make complete sense. Many times I've heard this kind of argument that we're going to raise sentences as a result of changes that are designed to reduce sentences. The interesting thing is whether we have a good time or not good time, or we have programs that are designed to put you off of supervision, whether it's parole or not. The sentences don't seem to change very much, except for they incrementally always go up. I don't know that there's going to be a huge change. I'd want to see what happens. My guess is that people are going to continue to do what they've done, and the bill's going to have an effect. I think that the administrative probation and the limitations on the types of conditions of probation that could be placed on an individual, having to have it be related to specifically to the criminal activity and the risk factors of that criminal activity, have done well. And I just see this as a next logical step. I thought this was really just one of the key parts of the bill going forward. And if I remember, wasn't this suggested by the Department of Corrections?
Yes.
This wasn't.
Actually, it was Mike Touchette, and then David Schur said that the Attorney General's office strongly supported it, and it was actually suggested because Mike had left. It was actually suggested by David, but it was originally Mike Touchette's proposal.
Right, and this started before CSG even got involved.
Yep. Yes, it was not part of the. Well, I'm not sure if it started before, but it was not part of the Justice Reinvestment original plan.
There were originally three things, and it was the presumptive parole was one of them. Good time on probation was another, and I don't remember the third off the top of my head. But I don't know. To me, it's worth trying. And it's more than, I think it's more than just a guess that it'll have a positive impact.
Well, I don't think we would have passed it if we didn't think it would. But we're stuck with a potential political reality here. And I have yet to challenge how a Zoom conference committee would go. And I'm not sure I want to have my first conference committee on Zoom on this issue. So, Ellen, do you have a comment?
Because we didn't dive into this at all, we didn't analyze the potential for the policy. We also didn't speak to anybody about it. I don't have anything to offer by way of an idea or a compromise. I'll just say that because as we were tracking how things were changing in the House, I've been keeping my colleagues who are ready to help implement anything as soon as that's possible updated on this. And I think we've got some ideas about how additional conversation and analysis of this issue could go over a relatively short period of time, including just diving a little bit deeper into the numbers on probation and revocations and sentence lengths to try to provide legislators, if this plan as proposed by the House were to move forward, and the idea would be to study it further, how we could be helpful potentially in providing some more data and ideas, or at least some information to inform that process. I don't think it's a crazy idea to add to that if need be.
Well, I think that we have a couple of alternatives. One is to do what they did on the furlough side, which I know corrections strongly disagrees with them on the what the House did on the furlough. And that was, they set an effective date, I believe, of December of 2021. Am I correct? Or 22, I mean.
July, I think it's July of 2021.
Okay, July of 2021. That's what they did. We could offer it as an alternative that our probation sections become effective July of 2021. Or we could leave the study in and go with the alternative suggested by Pepper to have a midpoint review and then let the study go ahead. Those seem to be two alternatives, but right now, if we were to accept their furlough changes, these are some places we could compromise, I think. So if we were to accept that the furlough goes into effect, what I assume the House was saying was, we'll study the furlough thing, and if we need to make changes to it, we can do it before its effective date of July of 2022. Same is true of the probation section. So those are just two alternatives to keep in mind. But I don't intend to leave that to completely to study. I'm not comfortable with that, I should say, because as Matt said, I think to me, this was a key initiative to moving forward. But I appreciate the volunteering. Just to make sure, you're going to be able to, Ellen, the Justice Centers, we're going to continue to work with Vermont throughout this process, at least until 2021.
Yeah, if Vermont passes legislation, then the state can formally request, and it's no guarantee, but very likely get the thumbs up from BJA to continue to work with the state on implementation. And we're ready to do that at a moment's notice to start that process.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yeah, Joe.
This may be totally off the wall, but as I'm sitting listening to this conversation, we had a discussion last week with Martin Lalonde about the classification system. And I'm just rolling through my head right now that classification system has potential ties to this entire conversation depending on what crimes get classified in what fashion. Is this all part of one project that really ought to be looked at in total rather than piecemeal?
Well,
I've stumped everybody apparently with that.
Yes, you have. Maybe you could be a little more.
Well, there's a desire on Martin's part, at least, to structure sentences on the way a crime is classified. And I'm just wondering if the tying of probation discussion to the classification to put legs on what is potentially a discussion about the entire system as opposed to dealing with each component piecemeal may not force all of us on both sides of the building to coordinate that discussion in one method. I'm just trying to think outside the box because obviously we have the potential here for a committee of conference that's not going to work, frankly, in my opinion, in the given time we have left. And I don't know how to get around that without pointing down the road and saying, look, you guys have presented something over here that has some connection to the discussion we're having here. And perhaps this is a much bigger project that ought to be focused in such a way that we deal with it all at the same time.
Well, fundamentally, whether you change the probation system, back when we did Justice Reinvestment 1, there were 12,000 people on probation, many of whom were dead, some of whom had been on for 20, 30 years without paying a fine, many of whom had never reported to the probation officer. They couldn't find them if they wanted to. And we made some significant changes there so that the average probation term is now down to the maximum, is usually 3 years, I think. So it would seem to me that further reform of probation could wait until July of 2021, but I'd want to make sure that something's in place. As an alternative, we could go with Pepper's suggestion and then leave that study in of the other proposals, but we should at least be reviewing probation. I think now we're down, and somebody correct me with the numbers, I think we're in the 6,000 range on probation. Anybody know? Guess not. So whatever range we're at in probation, I think leaving this issue, I'm uncomfortable with not at least having some way to make sure that probation gets addressed. And I'm not sure the same motivation will be there just because we're going to study it. That's the problem.
Well, the only obstacle there though, Dick, is if we run into a conflict with the House,
Yep.
we're out of time. I mean, and so does the whole project go down the tubes? And I don't want to go there either. So I'm
No.
trying to think outside the box to keep
I
it
hear
alive.
I hear you. I think actually the alternative from Pepper is the right way to go at this point. Bryn? I can't hear you.
Yes. How can did you have a question for me?
Yes. The putting, can you, where, I've lost you. No, there you are. Sorry. These, putting an effective date of 2021, July 1, 2021, and moving forward in that respect on this, is that something that is doable in drafting?
Yes, it is. It was spoken about by the House Corrections and Institutions Committee as one of their options for moving forward. They obviously chose not to take that option, but it was discussed in the committee.
Okay. And was Judiciary involved, House Judiciary involved in this decision, or was it mainly Corrections?
No, this was a decision by House Judiciary. They took a look at these sections, and it was actually their recommendation to the Corrections and Institutions Committee that that committee remove those sections. And in their deliberations about whether or not to accept House Judiciary's proposals, that was one of the ideas that was floated.
Charity Clark is here right now, and from the Attorney General's office. And before you joined us, Charity, we're currently discussing the probation proposal that was in the Senate version. That was one of David Scher's proposals before he took his hiatus. And so we're talking about two alternatives here. One is to make that sections effective July 1, 2021, or to go with an alternative that would have a midpoint review after a year, actually not a midpoint review, a yearly review of all probation statuses, people that are on probation, so that we make sure that people who are not staying on, who are doing well, and we don't have to wait around for a technical violation, we can get them off probation quickly. You want to comment, or would you rather take a few minutes to think about it?
I can comment generally based on my conversations with David. And again, sorry that he can't be here and I'm pinch hitting for him, but he did highlight for me with this bill, the one thing that he was not pleased with that came out of the House that he emphasized was the delay in implementation. So I know that, he felt very strongly that there was no reason to delay implementation. So I'll just generally say that and then, kind of listen and think more as this proceeds.
All right. Pepper?
Yeah, I don't want to speak for him, but he and I worked on this accelerated midpoint review language together as an alternative to the day-for-day credit on the maximum minimum. He, I think, was somewhat agnostic whether we go day for day towards the maximum minimum or this accelerated midpoint review. And that's not the right terminology for it, because really it would be a review regardless of your probationary period, either at the midpoint or after a year, whichever comes first. He was supportive of the study language. He was not supportive of delaying the furlough implementation date.
Okay. So I think before we take a break, I'd like to have the committee for whenever we get to it, maybe we'll have some time sometime this week, to be able to consider both alternatives. One alternative, delayed startup of our sections 1 through X on probation, to start effective date July 1, 2021. And the second alternative would be the SA's proposal to have the reviews yearly or midpoint, whichever comes first. I presume that'd be something like the automatic review in DCF. People on DCF custody have a automatic yearly review. Is that what you had in mind, Pepper?
There's a
Who would be
section of law.
reviewing it? I mean, if it's just the probation officer reviewing it, that's about as meaningless as it can get.
Well, the suggestion was to model it after the midpoint review, which is already current law, but to move that up, which again is something that can be reviewed even if the state's attorney doesn't agree with it. It's a motion to the court, and the state's attorney can
It's a motion to the court. It's not just a probation officer reviewing it. Matt?
That was my concern, is that there is this midpoint review that goes on now by the Department of Corrections, but I spoke to the Prisoners' Rights Office about this, and they basically see that as effectively meaningless. If it's review, it has to be reviewed by like the court or somebody outside who has the authority to discharge the person from probation if they're doing well.
Yeah, if it was built more like the juvenile system, and Judge Grierson, if you wanted to comment, I'm happy to hear that. But it seems to me if it was built something like the juvenile system, where the review at least it doesn't have to be a formal court hearing, but it could be at least reviewed.
We often, for the record, Brian Grierson, Chief Superior Judge, we often get requests from the department for ending the probation. If the state agrees to them, I would say it's fairly routine for the court to grant those if they're stipulated to. If there's an objection, then based on the department's request, we will schedule those for a hearing. What I can't tell you, and maybe that's what Matt is referring to, is I don't know. Department of Corrections would have to offer. I don't know if they do it in every case or they decide certain cases are appropriate to end the probation. So I don't know how selective they are in that process, I guess is what I'm saying, but we sometimes have hearings on them.
Has the House passed the bill yet, Bryn?
No, it's on for second reading today.
Okay. So we have time. That's helpful. I think, Joe, did you have a question or comment?
Not about this subject, but before you break, I wanted to ask a different question.
Okay. I think we've kicked this one right now. There seem to be two viable alternatives to me, as long as the review is a meaningful one that would involve the court. Go ahead on your other.
The feasibility study on the women's prison.
Yep.
There's been a provision stuck into the capital bill that covers the same issue and demands a report back at the preliminary report in October and a final by December. I don't want to have that provision be at war with what's going on currently, and I'm not exactly sure where that feasibility study is on our side or in our committee. I want to make sure we don't have a conflict developing. And I'm wondering if any of the players on this screen right now can tell me where that study is, and well, I'll stop there.
Well, Commissioner Baker is not on yet, so he might be the one who would know. Anybody know? I believe Commissioner Baker is scheduled.
I don't have him on the agenda for today.
How did that happen? I screwed up.
I can try and invite, I can email him and see if he can come on after the break.
Oh boy, I screwed up. I thought I would put him on. Obviously, I'm pretty sure he was.
Maybe
It's
I'm
okay, Senator Steers. You know, yesterday I screwed up and didn't get almost anybody on that was supposed to be on, and got people
Well,
on who had no idea why they were there. So
But, well, at any rate, I don't know how we can talk about justice reinvestment without the corrections department at
I'll
some
see what-
point involved.
I'll email and
So
see if we can get him.
I had fully intent. I think he was on my list, but I can't tell you for sure.
We'll talk about screw ups. I just, in case you haven't noticed, Matt, I'm also on your Defender General's conference behind me. So I just want to let you know I'm in that Zoom meeting too.
I'm glad you're paying attention.
All right, so
I turned it off when you got done talking.
we're going to take a 5-minute break, and hopefully we can either get Dale or somebody from DOC here. I can't really have this. It's particularly about the furloughs, because I know that Jim Baker has some strong feelings about the furloughs. So why don't we get back together in about 5 minutes? Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to mute everybody.
All right.
Senator Sears, did you get my email?
You're muted, Senator Sears.
It was totally my fault. I missed them on the first agenda and then we never caught it on the other ones. So I just hope Dale can come.
Yep.
I'm so
Well,
sorry.
It's okay. It's not the end of the world. We could talk a little bit about why they removed compassionate parole, since as soon as Senator White gets on, and how we want to deal with that. And I don't know that I don't think the department was necessarily opposed to that.
Excuse me, Sam, I may have to step away for a second. I see somebody's come to my house.
Oh, okay. So that section got removed. Bryn, can you help us a little with that, if you're here?
Sure thing. So if you look at page 20 of the side-by-side, that has the Senate passed version, section 6, which is the eligibility for parole consideration statute. And then if you flip to the next page, page 21, that's the language in subdivision 3 that provided for that compassionate parole. So the House removed that section. I'm reluctant to characterize their whole conversation because I don't think I was there for all of it, but they decided that they didn't think, it was I think that their conversation really turned on it may wind up that there are some people who are released under this provision that shouldn't be released, because I think that their conversation sort of took the turn of just because a person is 65 years of age or older doesn't necessarily reduce their risk.
I suppose Bernie Madoff's request for compassionate parole didn't help the discussion.
So I spent a lot of time with them.
Yep.
And here's what I think their bottom line was. First of all, I understand that the victims network came in and testified against it and said you shouldn't be releasing people who've done bad things regardless of their age. And then there are a couple people, I believe, who have either worked in corrections or been connected with corrections somehow. And mainly what I heard was that these are really bad people, and there are probably only 3 or 4 people in this category anyway. And so just let them be there. And I tried to make the point that, first of all, this did not guarantee anything at all. It just gave them the right to appeal. And I also tried to make the point that if we trust the parole board to make decisions about other people, let's trust the parole board to make decisions about this category of person also, because they seem to have in their mind that it didn't mean that the parole board was going to make a decision and the victims could come and testify, and that they would go through the whole process that the parole board goes through. They just saw it as getting people out of prison, and they shouldn't be. And there was some fear of forming a new category of person who was eligible. That's other than not trusting the parole board for people over 65 and thinking they're really bad people and they shouldn't get out anyway. I didn't hear any real arguments. So.
Okay. Mary Jane, do you have any comments on the removal of this section in terms of the parole board?
We don't have any comments per se. We've been kind of neutral on all of this the whole time. We can see a little bit of the victim concerns. I think the piece that I originally misinterpreted was I was under the impression that they would serve 5 years of their minimum sentence regardless for credit of time, that credit for time served wouldn't be included. And that was brought up in some of the House testimony, that there was concerns around re-victimization based on a potential quick turnaround, being that these folks could receive a significant amount of credit for time served. I think we would feel a little bit more comfortable if it was clearer, if it was serving 5 years, including credit for time served or not including credit for time served. But we've been neutral kind of the whole way, that we want to make sure the victims' rights are heard, but also want to try to limit that re-victimization.
Well, we've had this issue kicking around for a long time. But thank you. That's helpful.
Yeah.
What is our length of term, Brennan, here that they have to serve? What could we do there?
It's 5 years. Currently, you have it as they have to have served 5 years of their sentence.
How about 1/3 of their sentence?
I think that, can I just respond to Mary Jane's comment?
Well,
the way I understood you to say that was that if, say, your sentence was 8 years and you've served 5, but have you really served 5 because you were getting time for time? So I think that it could be very clear that they have to have served 5 years. That doesn't include, I mean, you can't use time for time to reduce that from 5 years. It is 5 years served. Did I understand that right, Mary Jane?
Yes, that's kind of what I was getting at, and that I was pointing across, because you have good time that's with it getting in effect, plus your credit for time as you are a detentioner.
Right.
So somebody could get 8 years, but were served 2 years as a detentioner. So that brings them down to about 6 years on their minimum. So those 2 years could come into effect. And I believe that is some of what the testimony was stating in the House, that it was the credit for time served was already reducing. But I think it would make us feel, the parole board, a little bit better, because we first interpreted that they would be serving 5 years before they would be eligible.
Mm-hmm. And I think that was what we meant. They'd serve 5 years. And once they'd served 5 years, they were eligible to apply. It isn't in the presumptive.
Right.
But I do not think they're going to change their minds. They were, and I talked, one of my representatives is on that committee, and she thinks that there's no way they're going to change their minds on that one.
Well, she's probably right, but that doesn't mean we have to accept it.
No, I agree with you. Yeah.
So we could rewrite it to make clear that it's actually
5 years served.
Jesus Christ. Oh, Lord. So, unbelievable.
Senator Sears?
Yeah.
I see the idea about making the 5 years clear, but I might be wrong, but it seems like the bad people argument is really at the heart of it.
Yep.
Otherwise, they would have suggested a clarification like that.
Yeah.
Which takes us back to Joe's point. How do you prevent being at loggerheads with 2 weeks left to go?
Well, one way you could prevent it is to have compassionate parole out of the bill and put it into the study.
Well, can I comment about the 2 weeks
Can I
left to go?
Can I just,
Oh, I thought you were done. I'm sorry.
one of the ways to deal with it would be put that as part of the study that the working group continues to work on. And we've been kicking compassionate parole down the road for years. This is not a new issue. It passed the Senate, but I know that when Peg Flory was chair of institutions, she had a bill on it that they took up, but they couldn't get agreement on. So I don't want to leave the issue completely. So that would be one alternative, would be to put it into the study and ask, to find out, because I mean, I saw the other day somebody 75 being, convicted of a sex offense and is going to serve some time, but I'm not sure that, when he turns 85, he's really going to be appropriate to continue to be incarcerated in a maximum secure or prison in Vermont. That maybe he'd be better off in a nursing home or some other setting. So I just, I think it's important to deal with it, particularly with an aging population. So. Go ahead, Senator White.
Well, I was just going to say, I think we we need to be careful that we don't make decisions based on the fact that we think we have 2 weeks left, because the way I understand this is that we're going to break sometime toward the end of June, and then we're going to come back in August or September. And during that period of time, conference committees can still act, because when we come back, there can still be conference committee reports that come out. So we do have time if it's something that's important to the pro tem and the leadership to deal with.
My suggestion is that we concur with this proposal of amendment, which would be to put compassionate parole into the working group's responsibility to come back and report on. Can you do that, Bryn?
Sure thing.
So that at least if Senator White is correct and they're not going to budge on it, they should at least have no objection to continuing to look at it, because we've been doing it for a long time. I can't remember. I think Iluzzi was here when we first started to take up compassionate parole. So that takes, I'm sorry, Senator Iluzzi was chair of, I got to remember not to be so flippant. Senator Iluzzi was chair of institutions when I think the issue of compassionate release first came up.
Talk about compassionate.
Talk about compassionate. So I don't think we should we should not ignore it just because the House took it out. But Joe's correct. There's no point in trying to do something they're not going to do. So that takes care of that. Unfortunately, Commissioner Baker is not available. I think we could best, so it's hard to have the conversation about furlough revocation appeals and the good time effective date being delayed, as I believe that was a recommendation by the Department of Corrections, if I'm correct, I don't know. Bryn, do you?
What are you referring to?
Good time being delayed.
Yes, that was a request of the Department of Corrections.
So we're going to have to reschedule the Department of Corrections at some time. And my Southwest Vermont healthcare pen is just broken, so now I have to find another one.
I just want to go
I'll
on
tell
the
you what,
record.
these hospitals are getting cheap in their pens. Anyhow, all right. So we're gonna have to find a time next week to.
I need to go on the record that was completely my fault, not Senator Sears.
Well,
And I do apologize to the committee.
It
was a
really
total
doesn't
oversight.
matter. But well, it only matters in terms of trying to schedule somebody when Jim Baker's available. And we've got all the other people here. I'd like to understand, I'd at least like to understand where we're at, how we got into this furlough revocation mess. Why is it controversial? Why is corrections? So Matt, maybe you could explain, I think you were behind this.
Yeah, to some degree. Definitely behind the more, it's actually a more circumspect process than what came out of the Senate Judiciary Committee. There was always a little bit of a debate back and forth in your committee about whether to use Rule 74 or Rule 75. Not much of one, and you know, I had the ability after the bill came out of your committee to do some more research about when the two particular rules are used. Rule 75 is typically used when there is no direction from the legislature that a matter be reviewed. So it is a catch-all rule that allows review of government action where the legislature has been silent on direction. What you did was sort of odd in that you directed them to use Rule 75 to review whether or not a probation or a parole, whether the furlough violation was wrongful, and didn't give. And you did have a standard in, but you didn't have any particular criteria to say what would make it wrongful. So what it ended up going on in the House Judiciary Committee was, first, because the legislature was directing that a matter be reviewed, being the furlough violation, remember it's technical violations, that pushed the review into Rule 74. And the department was at that time, still fighting this, saying that it was, that they didn't like the breadth of the review of it being wrongful. So what I said is, well, why don't we take your own directive and use your standard as the basis for review. So the couple of portions involving risk of reoffense and ability to control in the community that is in the House, that came out of the House Judiciary Committee, is directly from the Department of Corrections directive. Now, one of the things that is not was not discussed, I think, well, and probably that's my fault, in the Senate Judiciary Committee the first time around, was while the department has these guidelines in the form of these directives that as to when they should violate furloughs, and they're 2, 3, 4 pages long, none of those have the force of law. They are not, none of those directives have any, they don't go through the APA. They're not statutorily based. They are basically just guidelines that all of the case law currently says the department is free to ignore. They have the ability to ignore their own guidelines. Frankly, I was much better prepared to discuss that part of this in the House than I was early on in the session in the Senate. So the attempt actually regarding this review was to try to make sure that if the legislature was directing it, the appropriate rule was Rule 74. And if the legislature was directing it to Rule 74, that it was a limited type of review involved, and we chose the language directly from the department's own directives as to what the standard would be. And originally, it came out as a de novo review to the Superior Court. But there was concerns by the court over that. So to accommodate everybody, it was a de novo review of the record that DOC used with the ability of the defendant or offender to make a statement on his own behalf. And then only then, if the court wanted to hear more evidence, the court could either allow it or not in their own discretion. So the court wanted to streamline the proceeding so it didn't take up too much time. And apparently what the department is most angry about is the concept of de novo review. But this is a limited de novo review as it's described in the coming out of the House. A court would look at whatever the department looked at below, take a statement from the offender, and that probably would be it in most cases. But if they wanted more evidence, if the court wanted more evidence, they could allow that. And so what it actually did was give more structure to what came out of your committee and gave a specific standard that's already based upon what the department's directive is as the basis for review. And when it came out of the House Judiciary Committee, it would have accommodated the department's needs. But when Baker got to the House Corrections Institutions Committee, we don't want de novo review. We don't want review of our parole, of our furlough making decisions. This is something that is inherent in the Department of Corrections. And then the battle really started because my discussions were, the lack of review of these types of decisions is part of what gives rise to, the unaccountability that occurred at like the women's prison and in other circumstances where, unfortunate acts were going on with, your furlough status being held over your head or your probation status being held over your head. And it kind of degraded into, we're all throwing rocks at each other by the end. And ultimately, the committee to try to accommodate, meaning the House Corrections Institutions Committee, in an attempt to accommodate the House Judiciary Committee, said, well, we'll put a delay in its implementation in. But I see what went on in House Judiciary Committee as a refining and actual limitation to some degree of what came out of the Senate Judiciary Committee, but wholly consistent with what the Senate was trying to do. I didn't remember this being as contentious when it was over in the Senate at all. And in fact, the Senate's version is a much broader review than what came out of House Judiciary. So, I'm glad that it's still in the bill to some degree because it was this close to being out of the bill, like, day for day on probation and compassionate release. And by then there'd be almost nothing left to the bill.
Thank you. Questions from Matt? So this is technical violations only, correct?
Right, technical violations that would result in incarceration for more than, or an interrupt of more than 30 days.
Okay.
I even made the offer and said, look, if you don't want it to be 30 days, make it 60 days, make it 90 days. Fundamentally, DOC did not want that decision reviewed. That's what it really boiled down to. And I couldn't accommodate that.
So to recap where we're at on the 6 major issues between us. Thanks, Matt. We're looking at 2 alternatives on the probation sections. One would be a midpoint review, or a yearly review, with some kind of process. The second would be to make the probation sections effective 7/1/21 to be consistent with the furlough thing that we just talked about. That's in the House bill. I believe we're okay with, we're gonna have, as part of our proposal back to them, adding compassionate furlough or compassionate parole, whatever you want to call it, to the study by the working group, so that hopefully at some point we do something about this. And with, as I said, with an aging population, it's incumbent upon us to do that. Maybe the language Bryn could reference looking at what other states are doing, because other states have dealt with this problem without offending the victims community and others. The open issue is furlough revocation and good time effective January 1, 21. And that was from, in our version, what was that, 10/21?
It was October 1st in the Senate version.
October 1st, 2020, right?
Yes.
Okay, so it's a 3-month change. We are okay with the working group, Justice Reinvestment Working Group, but may have some changes to that. The compassionate parole and the issue of probation that we remove and deal with elsewhere. So those are the, I think those are the difference. Anything else that I missed? So, Peggy, would you see if Commissioner Baker's available on Tuesday after we get off the floor? I don't see how to fit him in.
Yeah.
I would only reoffend more than I've already reoffended certain groups if we hold off on our discussions about the issues regarding race and
I heard from Monica Weber, and she said that herself and Dale should also be part of the discussion for other sections. I'm not really sure.
Well, I'm not interested in, I don't know what other sections it is that they have problems with, but I'm not going to go through the complete. We're going to, if they didn't get what they wanted in the House at this late date, I want to focus on those 2 sections, and if they've got other problems, they can bring them up.
Okay. What are the sections again? Section numbers? I can ask Bryn.
Bryn, the good time effective date and the furlough revocation issue.
Okay.
Which I believe is page 48 of the side-by-side on the furlough.
Okay, so you just want to hear from the commissioner on those 2 issues?
Well, if they want to bring up other issues, they're welcome to.
Okay.
But I want to have a decision made by the committee on Tuesday so that we can respond next Wednesday morning to whatever the House has done, assuming they pass the bill. I think it's, I want to have a response back to them.
Okay.
Peggy, it's section 12 and 14 of the House version of the bill.
Okay.
Dick, while we've got him, can I ask the commissioner about the feasibility study on the women's prison just to see where it's at?
Yep. We'll warn him about it first, so they're prepared to answer the question.
Yeah, we talked to Al Cormier in institutions yesterday about it, but I think there's a general reluctance to have that provision contained in the capital bill. And I certainly don't want to end up with it there dictating terms A and B if it's working through S30, 338 and ends up saying C and D for whatever reason. That would be a problem.
Yep. No question about it. God, how do we get ourselves into these messes? Okay. Well, I'm not going to kick this can any longer. Is there any final comments from anyone who's a witness here or from the committee members who want to? We've actually got quite a bit of time left on the committee schedule, but it's a beautiful day in the neighborhood. Matt?
The only thing that I wanted to say is, and I had spoken with Dave Scher on the phone maybe yesterday or the day before, is that he was actually very involved in the drafting of the furlough section as well. And it seems that really the only objection to it is coming from the Department of Corrections. The AG's office supported it, DG's office supports it, and I think the court was acceptable in its whittled down form of a record review with a statement. So, you know, I mean, the committee's gonna have to make a decision. To us, it's an important part of this. You know, if anybody disagrees, I see Judge Grierson popped up there. I didn't think that by the time it was done that the judiciary had any major issues with it.
Judge, if you want to comment now or wait till next week.
Right. I'd let the committee know that we didn't, when the final version came out of House Judiciary that Matt has talked about, the idea of it being Rule 74, de novo on the record review with the opportunity for the defendant to come in. We felt that was I don't want to call it a compromise, but the difference between what came out of Senate Judiciary and that process we thought was appropriate. What our concern was in a purely de novo hearing that would open up the possibility of, you know, an entirely new hearing, new facts, additional facts. And so by limiting it to the record, we thought that was an appropriate standard to use, but at the same time giving the offender the opportunity to offer not only their own testimony, but the possibility of the court opening up beyond that.
Senator, may I just respond to what Matt said?
Yeah.
For the record, yes, the Attorney General's office absolutely supports the bill. I just want to be clear about that. And I agree with Matt's assessment of, you know, where folks stand.
Okay. Anything further?
Dick, can we talk about the committee's schedule?
Sure, we can talk about it.
I was just curious as to what is going to happen with tomorrow, especially given the pro tem's decision to put an all Senate caucus in at the same time.
We talked about that before you joined us. We are going to start at 9:30. We've shifted the agenda slightly. I contacted the pro tem and he said that, or Peter responded that we should plan to move over to the committee page at our committee Zoom site at 9:30.
Thanks.
And that anything dealing with judiciary be finished by then.
And are we on for Friday as well?
We are on for Friday as well. My plan right now, we have one witness who is not yet responded to the invitation, but we have an agenda for Friday at 9 and tomorrow at 9:30. So we try to finish the e-file issue. I've got an hour for that. I believe that, and if I'm not missing something, and Michelle needs to be involved in this. I believe that the Bar Association and the court are fairly close on the e-file issue.
On the e-file, Michelle will be there tomorrow.
And then at 10:30, we begin a committee discussion with Senator Ash and Bryn and perhaps another person regarding the law enforcement issues that Senator Ash and criminal justice perform.
So are we, I get so confused about our schedules sometimes. Are we on an all Senate call at 8 and then here at 9:30?
Yes,
Is that, okay? And that, tomorrow is Thursday, am I right?
tomorrow is, yes.
Okay. And then we're on the floor at 1 and then in GovOps afterwards. Okay.
Well, I'm not in GovOps.
No, I know, but it's so much easier running up and down the hall.
Yeah. Well, the other problem is that, so Friday, we will begin we'll have some testimony from various individuals, and then next Wednesday, Thursday, and we'll have more testimony and hopefully mark up a bill and vote it out on the following Friday.
So could I ask a question about that? I had talked to Tim and I wasn't sure if, because we will have some things also coming around the academy and the training council and stuff like that. So the question was, do we want to wait and put it all into one big bill, or do we want to have a bill coming out of Judiciary and a bill coming out of GovOps? And that's something I don't know. So just,
I don't care.
I don't either.
I think it's better to, I want to deal with the use of deadly force, the prohibition on certain restraints. I'm going to call it restraints, and required intervention when an officer is using excessive force.
So deal with those first and get them out.
And the body camera requirement.
Yeah.
And
okay.
That's, I think, clearly judiciary issues.
Yep.
That we should deal with. And as I said earlier, the body camera is probably the easiest of them, as is the racial data relating to traffic stops. Now, there may be other issues that come up during testimony, but I think those are the ones that judiciary will concentrate on. And if you could concentrate on, I think it's bill is 119, which has to do with.
You know, I don't know that we'll use some bill for it, but there are a lot of issues here, and I've sent out a list of 18 things that have come as suggestions that concern our committee. So we'll just count on probably doing 2 bills so that we can get the use of force and the chokehold and stuff and the data collection out quickly.
Yep. I think, well, but there is reference to a couple of House bills that they were working on those issues. That's all I can tell you.
I know. I've got them.
Okay.
Jeanette, you better bring it all through Judiciary, because on rules, we're not going to let any more bills out of your committee.
So what bill are we using in the Senate to put all this on?
S219.
S219, thank you.
Is the Baruth bill on traffic.
Okay.
Stops.
On data collection.
Well.
And granting awards and a bunch of stuff, yeah.
Well, maybe Senator Baruth can briefly explain his bill, since I'm reporting it to the Senate on the Senate floor.
Jeanette had it right. It's traffic stop data has to be reported within a 6-month window. Otherwise, you're ineligible as a department for grants.
Okay. Thank you all very much. We'll see you all tomorrow.
All righty.
If not this afternoon.
I'll be on tomorrow again, Matt. We'll see you tomorrow too.
Sorry, guys.
Bye.
All right. Bye.